Welcome everybody to today's Steal This Workflow live. This is going to be the first time that we've done a specific Steal This Workflow session. I'm super excited to have Max Cohen here with me.
I'm super excited to be here, Stuart.
Happily, previously of HubSpot, of course. I'm sure many of the folks here know Max, know his awesome parodies, his awesome video work. But
yeah, Max, Stuart, I gotta say, when you after I posted the parody Steal These Workflows content, when you messaged me the other day, I was like, oh no, he's gonna be so mad at me for some reason. And then you're like, hey, do you want to come on Steal This World? I'm like, all right, great, let's do it. So thank you for letting me do a little goof on the medium. It's great.
Yeah, of course. I mean, they were very insightful parodies. I think they were related. You got a bunch of engagement there. I think that they definitely hit a nerve.
The customer or the customer support one in particular popped off. But what can I say? You inspired me, man. So it's just what is it? Imitation is the highest form of flattery. That's all I'm going for, man. I'm just trying to be like you.
I mean, the Steal This Workflow has sort of taken on a whole life of its own. It's been a little crazy. Definitely very lucky that it's worked this way. And it's certainly nice to see that when hopefully putting out stuff that is helpful for folks and folks like is paying off. But for everybody here watching, we're just going to dive into HubSpot and talk through some workflows. Let us know in the comments for the event if there are workflows that you're currently working on that you're sort of having a challenge getting over a little hump, or if there's something that you would like to see and don't know if it's possible in HubSpot. Let us know all the things in the comments. We will try to get to any questions, get to any solutions that we can here. This is being recorded, so we will you'll have access to that at the end of this, and we have all the templates for these workflows are over at arrows.to/bolt. Totally open, don't even need an email address, but go over there and steal some workflows.
Steal these workflows specifically.
This is true. What do you say we get into this?
Let's do it.
All right. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen here, and we're going to take a look at our first workflow. So, and Max, I'm going to pause in this because we've been talking about something that's pretty cool, pretty new in HubSpot. I think it's still in beta, right?
Some kind of beta.
But I have not spent a whole lot of time in it. Max said it would blow my mind. He had to show me live. So
yes,
we're gonna do that. But
all right, we'll go do that just so everyone can see it, and then I'll have you tee up this what this workflow is, and we'll run through it. But This is again big exciting workflow update. Let's talk through what it is. So if you just scroll down to any of the actions in here that are using some kind of token to generate a task or a internal email or some sort of notification or whatever it is. I'm not sure the exhaustive list of all the different places in workflows that this new, what are they calling it? The data table? Is that the new?
Yeah, I don't know if it's data panel, something like that.
Data panel. Anyway, it's really cool. So usually, at least the way that I remember it, up until now, whenever you're creating a task or building some sort of Slack notification, right there is a good example. Wherever you can pop in these personalization tokens, generally they only let you pop in the personalization tokens of the type of object that it is, right? Isn't that that kind of the rule, unless I'm remembering it incorrectly?
Yeah, you only have access to the
whatever the object type of the workflow is, right? And so what this data panel does is this lets you bring in properties from associated objects, which is cool by itself. But then it also lets you bring in data from associated objects that almost meet a certain set of criteria, right? So the way that you do this is at first you're just going to see the normal object properties for whatever the workflow is, right? But
you can deal workflow for
so these are so it's going to say enrolled deal is the de facto object that you can bring these properties in on. But now if you hit add data source, you can choose other associated records. Now, once you do this once, you can do it for any of the other actions as well. But like, I like that they made this choice where you kind of intentionally add the property types that you, or the object types that you want to pull properties from, because otherwise it would just be a giant mess of like properties. But like, let's pull in like a company property, for example, or a company object, right? Now, this is where it gets crazy.
Label is nice.
Yes. So you can refine which associated objects it pulls in, and then go even further, right? So like, let's say, for example, you've got like multiple association objects or multiple like association labels for these objects, right? You could say, hey, well, I want to bring in properties from the object that's associated to this only if it has a certain association label, right? Which is like super wild. So if anyone's like working with partners, maybe you have in this case like a deal, and the deal object has like a primary company it's being sold to, but you also associate a company property of like a partner that you're working with, right?
Yeah.
You could differentiate which type of information it's bringing in. But beyond that, what that also means is you could bring in information from both associated company records. So let's say you had to build some sort of association that says, hey, go here's this new deal, and like we build like a notification or something, right? You could say it's for company name from the primary company, and the partner is, and then company name from the partner associated company, right? Instead of it only being one that you could pull from, right? So if you hit add right here, it adds the company. Yep. So it adds company here, right? And then we can edit the data that's available again. Let's go hit edit available data as well. And we can add data source. Let's choose company like one more time. And then select the way to refine. Do it by like activity, for example. So like, this is honestly like really ridiculous. You can literally sort it by like, so if you have like multiple of these objects like associated to this object that's going through the workflow, you can do it off the most recently updated one, the most recently created one, or the first one ever created, ever associated to it, right? Which I'm sure you can find like a million different sort of like fringe use cases for that. But when you select like another version of this, so like do most recently updated and hit like add, you'll see next to it company most recently updated, right? So it sorts these properties by whatever refinement that you gave them, right? To then bring them in.
Yeah,
it
so
is like
4 things that we can use in this.
It's wild. So yeah, it's just we're talking about workflows today. We've got to shoot the HubSpot team some love for this feature, because that is like that. There's like a lot of really annoying things that you kind of run into when it comes to like creating these personalization tokens, I guess is the easiest thing to kind of refer to them as, for like associated stuff, right? And oftentimes what really stinks is you have to set up a whole bunch of different workflows in order to push this information onto the record to then use it as a token like this, right? And now this eliminates the need for all of that.
Yeah, there's another workflow that we should, thinking about this, that we should probably take a look at, which could probably be sort of, to use a developer term, I guess, could be definitely be refactored with this approach, which is we built a workflow to roll up all of the CSAT or satisfaction scores from contacts that are associated with a company to that company record. So that you can get like an average satisfaction score for an account, like that kind of thing. But you could start to use this to like make the workflow much less, all the multiple workflows and all the extra tracking properties that you need in order to do that. You could probably remove a lot of that by using this data panel. But also being able to filter by things like most recently updated and time-based or activity-based stuff. You don't have to go check, like, is this somebody who has submitted a score at all? Like, is this somebody who has submitted a score in the last 90, whatever it is that you're want to keep as your sort of current scoring period? This is super interesting.
You could even do some like really sneaky like ninja stuff here, where it's like, let's say a new ticket is like opened up for someone, right?
Yeah.
And you're sending that notification to the person it gets assigned to. What you could also do is you could say, hey, you've been assigned to this ticket, and here's like the most recent NPS response from this customer who's associated to it. Just so like that support agent has that like extra bit of context going into it, to where they're just like, all right, I know I'm working this ticket, but I'm working this ticket with the context knowing that gave us a really bad score before, and maybe this is like a good opportunity for me to like fix that relationship a little bit. Right.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, maybe we should just do that right now on this particular workflow. If I let's go back to the top and just sort of set some context for this workflow, because I do think it's a good example to work through actually. So this workflow is, relative. You can use this in a million different ways, right? Essentially, what we're doing is it's a deal workflow. The reason for that is that we're using Arrow's data here, Arrow's customer facing onboarding plans. So your customer can be taking actions, they can be viewing the plan, you get all that data back inside of HubSpot, and we can use that to trigger, and that plan is attached to a deal. In this case, could also be attached to a ticket, but we're using that data to trigger this workflow when we have overdue tasks in our plan and they haven't been contacted in some period, in this case 3 days. And then we're saying, okay, now that we know that this is a customer who isn't taking action, isn't doing the things that we want them to do in onboarding, we have this branch that essentially splits out, well, how bad is it, right? Is it that they haven't done anything and they haven't been contacted? Is it that they haven't completed tasks, but they have viewed it, like they're trying to do the work? Or is it that they, I guess that last one, activity but no action. So like, what is where on the scale, or what category are they in when it comes to their engagement around our onboarding plan, right? And then based on that, we're splitting it out into branches where we're taking different action, right? So we're sending an automated email over here, we're creating a task over here, we're creating a task and assigning it to essentially different people, different playbooks. These could also be go run this HubSpot playbook, right?
Stuart, can I call out something you did here that not a lot of people do? Can you scroll up to like where it branches, right?
Yeah.
So a big mistake that I see a lot of people make, and this is like a really good example of not making that mistake, is building like redundancy into your if-then branches, especially if they're complicated or they're based on data that might, that could either get entered incorrectly or, get messed up somehow. So what's very interesting here is that you see this like if none branch, right? Where it says, hey, there's like missing data and we can't make a determination on this like activity level because something's not right, right? And what you see that Stuart's doing in here, if you scroll down, is Stuart is actually creating a task here to say, hey, if this fails, which it shouldn't, but if it does, right, we're notifying someone in the portal to go look at the account and figure out what's going wrong, right? This is like especially important if you're ever doing any workflows that do like if then branching that's setting people up for lead rotation, right? So like if you have like a complex like sort of lead routing, whether it's like on the customer service end or on the sales end, and you're saying like, all right, if they're in education, send them to this specific education rep. If they're a small business, rotate them on this team. If they're an enterprise company, rotate it between Jack and Jill, right? But oftentimes what people will do is they'll just assume that works every single time, and they'll assume that their data is rock solid, yet could be something happening that you just didn't account for. So it's always good to say, if that breaks, right, and we have this none field, make sure there's something that we're doing to like tell a human being, hey, that if then branch failed or that rotator failed, right? Because then you can go back and actually see, hey, where are things broken? And you remove that issue of that person kind of just getting lost and lost in the lead routing and not getting to the right place, right? So always build in the redundancy of like, if this doesn't work, how is it telling me, right? But I just wanted to call that out because like a lot of people forget to do that.
Yeah, totally. And just to rabbit hole there for a second, the catching or building the redundancy into the workflow and sort of catching the error is sort of the last line, right? It's this thing broke. We need to go fix it, but there's other things that you can do to I mean, I guess sort of on the caching error side is you can be reporting on workflows that run without data, right? Or records that are in a certain stage that would meet enrollment criteria that are missing data. Roll that up, but not to pick on sales or not to pick on a team, but like, do you need to break that out by the team member who is entering the data that was enrolled in the workflow, right? Are there reasons in the process that people aren't entering specific fields and they are entering others, right? Like maybe it's a field that isn't always captured at that point, and actually it's captured later, or it's not clear how they should enter that field, that kind of stuff.
And like, remember too, like HubSpot's tools have these like great like error alerts and things like that, but that's more for catching errors like when the software messes up. It's not so great at catching human error, which oftentimes from the software's perspective, it's working as intended, right? So just because you can let HubSpot do its thing with like errors from when workflows like aren't firing correctly, or there's some sort of like integration in there it's not working, or things like that. But like, don't be afraid of creating your own like human error capture devices, right? Whether that's like properties, reporting, like you said, things like that. Because that all that kind of stuff can like kind of help you how you refine your process and manage change and get people to like do things the right way and in the right order. So good stuff.
Totally. And I think that's one thing that's really powerful about defining your process in HubSpot is any CRM, but HubSpot has a lot of tools to help with this. If you can define the process in the data, like for example, in your onboarding pipeline, if you know that in order to start onboarding and actually sort of run that process, you need fields X, Y, and Z to be entered and complete. Require them in the handoff, right? Or have a stage at the start of a pipeline that is checking, we actually have the information that we expect at this point before we expose this to customers, before we try to run something more complicated and automated on top of bad data. Okay, so Max, maybe you can walk me through this. Let's take I don't know, let's say this one. So we have this task, which is to not particularly helpful at this point. Maybe with some new data, it can be more helpful. So we're going to re-engage this deal with a new approach, but we don't really have. We have a little bit of context here, right? We're pulling in some arrows data. We know we need to prompt them to complete. This is whatever the current task is. The current task is assigned to this person. This is the sort of human readable summary of like what has happened in the plan so far, but it doesn't really include any account level data, right? It doesn't include anything about the specific people who are on this or involved in this process. So if we wanted to add, let's say we wanted to add a section at the bottom that's like some context about the account. How would we do that using this sort of new data table? The new data that we can pull in.
So like let's give ourselves a scenario. Let's pretend we're like some kind of SaaS company, right? And let's pretend we have our users syncing into contacts, right? And maybe, for example, you have a like last login date, right? Or like maybe you have a custom behavioral events that are like firing off and doing things, like whatever it may be. Like maybe you want to bring in some information from like the associated contact here, right? Because you would assume the contact going through onboarding is also someone who's actually logging in and like using that tool, right? So what we could do in this case, instead of doing a whole bunch of properties gymnastics, like with 7 different workflows, bringing that information over into deal records, which like, man, it's like we were just doing that yesterday, and now we're in a world where we don't need to, which is crazy.
And you don't. The crazy thing there is you don't need it for anything else. You need it for that very specific workflow that you're trying to build. You don't really need all the properties there.
So it's got 7 different like parent workflows just feeding data onto the object, so you could make this like one stupid Slack notification, right? Like it's crazy, but like now, like I guess that's a thing of the past, right? So if we were to go just edit available data, should be pretty easy to add a data source here, bring in a contact, right? Now here, what's even cooler, if you're using association labels, maybe you have a contact associated to a deal as a, there you go, primary account admin, or maybe the onboarding contact or whatever it may be. And then, wow, it even gives you like another layer here. What's it telling us there? So, got it. So it also lets you do that same sort of layering of like the most recent stuff that's going on with them. So
that's super interesting because I don't want to mess up my tab here, but like
the hamster wheel's spinning now. I can tell.
Yeah,
your eyes just lit up. Now you're like, oh, I need to use this for another customer I have.
In this specific scenario, let's just pretend, because so I don't have to go make the association label. But let's just pretend that this is like onboarding participants or something like that. So it includes everybody who has access, or everybody who we've like denoted as they will be involved during the onboarding process. Now, if I go to most recently, maybe this doesn't really get me what I want, because what I really want is most recently updated on a specific property.
Okay. Yeah.
But like this person, or the person who is, meets the criteria of like they are involved in onboarding, and has been active most recently, is probably the best person to go reach out to try to restart this, right?
For sure.
So this maybe isn't perfect, but it probably gets me closer than not doing this.
Well, hey, think about it, if you have like an API pushing in a property for last login date, that would be the most recently updated person, right?
Yeah, as long as we haven't updated the record in some other way.
Oh, true. Yep, you're right.
That's kind of why I was hoping you could filter here to a specific property.
Got it. Yeah. So if it, well, hey, HubSpot product team, if you're watching, right? If there's a way that you could say with the most updated property of, and then like choose that property, that'd be crazy. Yeah. Cool. All right. So you go ahead and add that here, right? And then you're seeing all the properties of whatever contact that meets that subscription. And like, I know we probably don't have like a last login like date or whatever.
Yeah, I don't think
but
so.
Any of these like, date properties would kind of be like the same thing. So you would just kind of click that, bring it in, and boom, you got it.
Yeah.
That's so cool.
Yeah, I don't think we have anything. I mean, we have like, there are interesting things that you could do here. You could pull in what was their last score. There's so much potential here. Like once you really get into this. But yeah, let's just take first email click. Do I have last email click date? That would be kind of cool. Yeah, there we go. Last engagement date.
There you go. Sure. Bring it in.
Yeah.
Just as an example, it could be any date property at all, right?
Put it up here. Let's put it down at the bottom. Yeah, so this is, and I guess we would just,
last login date or last activity.
Yeah.
We're just dreaming.
Yeah. And you can do things like that just to go like grab another one, right? You can do, we probably have it on our.
Oh yeah, the company one, right?
Yeah, it's so cool that you can use this. So we can probably do, I can search up here.
Oh yeah, right. Yeah, calculated health score right there.
Yeah, or I can do health score color or something.
That's crazy.
You can see, it's pretty wild. I mean, and let's not forget that the real reason for doing all this is now, instead of the person who is actually trying to take this action, actually trying to complete this task, having to go like figure all this stuff out, it's just right there in the task.
Yeah. So you're eliminating tons and tons of like one step silly copy property to this object workflows that you would normally have to make to do this kind of stuff. Also, shameless plug for Associate here. So Associate is a product that happily makes that in your workflows, you can associate objects based on like data. And so, you could have workflows that are running these associations for you, right? And then, when you go to make these other workflow actions later on that are like pulling information from associated objects, hey, there you go, right? Had to get the plug in there.
Oh no, that was a great place to plug it. I mean, it's a super, associations in HubSpot is super powerful, and being able to do them in a workflow really does unlock a lot, right? It's if only association labels could be managed in a workflow, that would be.
Hey, Associate will let you set them.
There we go.
Cool.
All right. So the rest of this workflow sort of what, we looked at this one specific example, or this one specific example, but essentially just a sort of really quick recap, and we'll move on to the next workflow. But setting thresholds on your data that you have available. So if you're updating data live, in this case, it's coming from arrows, but it could be coming from your product. It could even be things that are sort of generated, by your team and entered manually, using an if-then branch to break out that what. Actually, it's funny saying this now. There's a lot of workflows that follow the same pattern.
Yeah.
Using an if-then branch to break that data into categories, so we can say, if it's within these thresholds, if it's within these, we're going to take different actions, which is the final step here, sort of running a specific playbook or a specific set of actions based on the categories or the categorization of the data that we have.
Yeah. And this is also just like a really good, example of not just doing like the cookie cutter things. Like you can see all these tasks and all these notifications is so dependent on the nuance of that particular customer situation, right? And like that's, it's one thing to tell your employee to do something via a task or a notification. It's a whole nother thing to tell them to do something in a certain way depending on the situation, right? You know what I mean? Like you see this a lot with like lead handoff, right? Where it's like, okay, sure, someone converts on your site and you pass the lead over to sales and say, oh, here's a lead, go try to sell them something, right? But that's way different than saying, here's a new lead that's assigned to you. They're extremely active, but they're not really a great fit. So keep that in mind in the way that you reach out, right? Or, hey, they're a really good fit, but they haven't been super active with us. Like they only came and asked for a quote. So approach them with that information in mind, right? That is like game changing for the way that like people reach out when they're not just like reaching out with the same sequence, saying the same message, saying the same thing, and just assuming everybody like wants to get contacted that way, right? So when you can give your teams that like nuanced data, nuanced notifications, nuanced context and information, so they can tailor the way that they approach the engagement, whatever side of the spectrum of sales and support or service that it's on, right? They just have that much more information and they can engage in a better way, right? So
for sure. And I think that's a good segue here. We can go and look at a handoff workflow maybe where we're sort of getting into that pretty specifically. But I think the way that I always think about it is how can we build the system around the work that we're already doing, right? How do you use the system to take away the work that isn't high value, that is sort of actually repeatable and repeatable. That's not a word. Repeatable and predictable. And let your team just work on the things that aren't predictable, that actually you do need their specific domain expertise, the specific skills to go execute on, and sort of give them more time on that higher leverage stuff.
No, for sure.
All right, so let me get back into HubSpot here, and we'll take a look at another workflow, which I think will be particularly relevant to just about everybody. Everybody has a handoff at some point from one team to another. Probably the most common one is going to be sales to whatever happens after sales. And the interesting thing here is we're sort of actually including some of that stuff that you just mentioned. Maybe I'm curious, like what you typically see in sort of how we would define the data that you're actually handing off. But in this case, I'm just going to show it here, but we would also put it in required properties on the pipeline, of course. But the things that we're sort of passing over, what is the persona? I should really go rename this, because every time I just say, oh, that's actually badly named. But essentially, like, what is the segment of customer? What is the sort of, is it this could be the products that they've bought. This could be the size of the account. This could be any number of things that, like, how are we defining this is the process that we're going to run with this customer?
Yeah.
Because, you're probably branching on SMB versus enterprise, or product A versus product B, and those are just different paths moving forward. What do we know about what they're trying to do, right? Like, how are they measuring success with the product? Like, hopefully we've discovered this early in the process, and it's not, maybe we're going to do deeper discovery after they've closed, but hopefully there's some information here that we can use to sort of help drive that experience. And then things that, if we want to track revenue, obviously we need amount. If we knowing who is the owner of that deal of the previous deal can be important. And then like, is there anything specific that we need to make sure it actually happens, right? Like if they are paying for a migration, or they are expecting to get a concierge type setup, like we need to know that so we can act accordingly.
Yeah, I think like a lot of people don't think of, like, people think of deal records as, this is the thing that I'm using just to sell what I'm doing, right? And if you sell some kind of product where any level of like onboarding or implementation is required after it, right? Not enough people think of that deal record as a communication to device to folks downstream from them they're going to use, that are going to like work with this customer, right? So something that I would like encourage a lot of people do, like when you are going to deploy a workflow like this, is what are you doing beforehand that's going to make this workflow work like flawlessly, right? And if you think about an if-then branch here, right? What it's doing essentially when you're checking to make sure all this data is ready, you're confirming all of that was done before it gets passed on to the next set of folks, whether they're working off of that deal record and they just need to see certain things in those properties, or if you're like using all this information because you have to like generate a ticket, which is I think what you're doing right here, right? Or maybe a deal, right? Whatever it is that you're building after the ticket. There you go.
Yeah, we have two. Yeah, we can talk about that. We have two different things we're creating here, but we're creating future things.
Okay, got it. Okay, so you're also doing you're doing the renewal as well, right? Yeah. So like all of this information is stuff that like you need, right, in order to create that subsequent renewal deal, but also say, hey, onboarding folks, right? Here's some important info they sent over for us to be able to actually onboard them effectively. Stuart, you mentioned earlier using things like required fields, like between stages, right? So for anyone who hasn't seen that before, when you're running your deal records, like as you change stages, you can make it so this information is required to be put in before it even gets there, right? But even though you're doing that, it's still good to have those checks and balances just in case something goes wrong there, right? Like maybe someone somehow skips a stage, or like a deal gets created in a close one stage already, or something like that, right? Hopefully you're doing stuff to stop that from happening, right? But if you're not, it never hurts to have that like that redundancy layer that we're kind of talking about here. And then maybe sometimes there is situations where like you're tactically not requiring things because maybe there are some bits of information you don't get to the very end, but you'd like to try to capture it earlier, right? But you also don't want to require it, but you want to give people the option of putting it in. And then maybe at the end they forget to do it. You can create some sort of task, like update it, right? And then loop people back through the workflow. So, you always want to be accounting for like human error when you're doing a lot of this stuff, which is why I love a workflow like this. So,
yeah, for sure. And I think it's finding that balance, and why sort of not just setting the workflow up and then forgetting that you set it up and just hoping that the process all worked perfectly every time. Is how do you actually, especially in a handoff workflow where you have multiple, or a handoff situation where you have multiple teams involved, how do you start building that feedback loop between teams? So this is the information that the post-sale team thinks is required, that they're actually using to do their job. Like, how do you make sure that we have a plan for capturing that in the previous stages, and that we are actually documenting it and we're catching things that aren't? But like, how do you make sure that you're not just asking for everything and it's not actually being used? Like, how do you start to build trust between teams by showing how the data that you're collecting is impacting ultimately the customer further downstream?
And you're hitting on one of the biggest causes of friction in adopting a CRM, is just having too much shit to write in fields. Like, you know what I mean? Like, if you don't need it, right, don't ask for it. But also it's like, if you don't need it right now, don't ask for it now, but make sure it's asked at the right time. And you can't kind of go past a certain time without that information, because it might screw up something downstream, right? I think the other thing that this kind of brings up too is just like, this is like a clear-cut example of why playbooks are so important, right? Because think about where a lot of this information is collected, like through discovery calls, sales calls, closing calls, right? all of those for the most part follow some kind of like, not script, maybe some follow a script, but not script, but like process. Like you go into like certain calls that you have, there's certain questions that you need answers to, right?
Yeah.
And playbooks can help you structure those conversations, but they can also make it so it requires you to put in the answers, and those answers get fed into properties on your deals and on your contacts and on your tickets and all that kind of stuff, which makes it that much easier for people to just see like, okay, I know how I should structure the conversation. I can pop in the answers to the questions I'm supposed to ask, boom. And I'm not spending any other time going back to the record and filling in properties and doing all this crap, right? So yeah, like these workflows are great. And then you also want to think about the stuff that like enables these workflows to be really great too, that's being done outside of the workflow, you know?
For sure, yeah. How do you go from the system and the workflow to the sort of customer by customer interactions that your team is having? Okay, so let's just take a quick look at these. This first one, so you mentioned the two different records that we're creating here. The first one is a deal because we're tracking the renewal. We have a separate pipeline for renewals in this case. We're sort of tracking, moving deals through that pipeline based on how long they have to renew.
Yeah.
So you can sort of really run an ongoing success motion, sort of, an account management, however you're setting that up at your company or whoever's responsible for that renewal. And the advantage there of having it in a separate pipeline is it's nice from a reporting perspective to sort of split those things out. But also you can then use data that is on those deals in that pipeline to trigger things as you need, right? So you can say, okay, we want to start running our renewal playbook. We start that 6 months out, whatever it is, 9 months out, wherever you put that. But we want to run it differently if this account is, has a healthy health score or if it has an at-risk health score, right? We're going to take very different actions. We're going to involve very different people based on what we know. So again, another example of sort of being able to define the process in the data, or at least set the thresholds for running your process in, or for which process you run in the data.
Yeah. And with this too, like I even like we were looking at your sort of like bigger branching sort of workflow that you did in the previous one, right? Where when you get down to this place and you're assigning it to like the right onboarding team or the right onboarding specialist or support person or like whatever it may be, right? You've got a lot of really great data that you've collected that you can then kind of, branch off and do very specific types of assignments based on that, right?
For sure.
If I could give you a little Zebra tie-in here, right? Now that we have this awesome new data panel feature, right? Let's say that you have a sales team closing deals using HubSpot quotes, and let's say you manage your recurring revenue on Stripe, right? You could have a quote that is actually, triggering a subscription to get created inside of Stripe. That ends up getting associated to the deal automatically. And then as you're kind of going through, depending on like the product that person purchased or the MRR of that, maybe if the MRR is above a certain threshold, perhaps you have like a different onboarding plan that you would apply to them based on the product, right? Or a different team or more tenured onboarding people that you would assign based on the MRR threshold, right? So there's a lot of things you can do. I think when you bring together like, your Stripe data and like your onboarding team and like what the plan is going to be for different customers based on what they buy, there's a lot of really neat things that you can do with that.
100%. And here's an example. I just switched over to a sort of the part 2 of that handoff workflow, which is, in that first workflow, we create the renewal deal. We also create a ticket for onboarding. You could create a deal for onboarding if you wanted, depending on what objects you're using there. But in this case, we're creating a ticket. And then exactly like you just said here, we don't have the Zebra time. We should.
It's all good.
But we have that if then branch, like simplistic example here. Are they an enterprise customer or are they an SMB customer based on that data that we've defined? We're assigning them to or rotating them between a different onboarding team. So enterprise in that case, SMB in this case. We're creating an arrows plan, a customer-facing onboarding plan based on a different template, right? So example onboarding plan, and it should be a different template. Let's go pick a I'd say it's large
Either
firm
way.
here for
Could be any one of them. Yeah.
For enterprise. But yeah, so you can take very different actions. You can, in this case, we're sending an automated welcome email. In this case, it's a personal outreach from their onboarding specialist. But being able to do that branching based on the data that you have available becomes really powerful, and especially if you have that Stripe data in here as well, you can sort of tie that in. Maybe you're using a MRR threshold or a specific products in Stripe.
Or maybe if it's just even like a direct integration like with your tool, right? Like let's say you're not using like Stripe or anything like that, and you've got some backend, you got your backend system that like manages your product and it's feeding data into HubSpot via the API, right?
Right.
The beauty of it is that you can use any of that data to create these more nuanced sort of customer experiences. But like the big lesson here is take the cookie cutter and just kick it out the window. Go put it in a smelter. You don't need to do that. Like there's so many better ways that you can be thoughtful in the way that you're onboarding folks, like given you have the resources to do so.
Totally. And I think that a big thing here is like, you don't, just because you're putting all this data into an automated workflow, it doesn't mean you have to automate the customer experience. Like, sure, that might be the goal of ultimately it's a no touch, entirely self-serve experience, but giving your team this data, like helping your team sort of take some of the decision fatigue out of like, well, what playbook do I run for this specific customer? The more of that you can sort of remove and present, like, this is the playbook that you should be running based on the data. They can then go execute that to the specific nuances of a customer, make any tweaks or whatever. But having a good starting point based on the data becomes pretty impactful.
Yeah.
Okay, handoffs. This has been the one that I think people always want to come back to, like between this, the sort of the setting up the onboarding records and actually, creating the post-sale records in HubSpot. Certainly the ones that folks always want to get into. One that probably the next one that I think is interesting, and I'm curious to get your takes on how you've seen folks setting this up. We were talking before about the million different ways that you could get to this point, but is health scoring, or maybe it's lead scoring, maybe some kind of scoring, and then what do you do with that score? This workflow is relatively simple, actually pretty similar to the first one that we looked at. It's taking this health score in, categorizing it, and then assigning a color to the category, and then setting a trend on directionally which way are we headed. I'm curious what you see, like if there's things you would want to dive deeper into in this specific workflow, but also it might be interesting to have that conversation around like, well, how do you do scoring in HubSpot?
How do you even get a health score in the first place?
Exactly. How do you get to the point? Because HubSpot has a score property type.
Scoring field. Yep. Yeah. And scoring fields are definitely a way to do it. The thing that's like so fun about this conversation is like, whenever you think of some kind of like health score or like health status or like however you want to word it, right? Every company is going to do that like a little bit differently, right? This conversation reminds me a lot of like just lead scoring in general too as well. I think a lot of people feel like lead scoring always has to be a number, right? But you can score leads in different ways than numbers, just like you can score a company's health in different ways than just numbers. You can translate a lot of that stuff to a number to kind of standardize it, then use it for things like workflows and stuff like that, right? But you got to think like, first you have to define like what do we think makes a company of ours or a customer of ours like healthy, right? Are we basing it on their interaction with our people, right? Are we basing it on their success in the tool? Are we basing it just solely on like their engagement, right? Because a company using a tool is very different than a company being successful with a tool, right? Like those are very different conversations. So first I'd say like one, establish what healthy actually means to you, right? And then, like what I would also kind of challenge you to do maybe is like go talk to your best customers and see if it jives with them, right? Your idea and understanding behind that, right? So it's kind of in line with a customer that feels successful, right? But yeah, and Stuart, you're showing a great example of it here, where you're using something like a calculated property, right, to actually give you some kind of number. I think the question too is like, how are you getting the data to get these numbers, right?
This is probably way overcomplicated definitely way overcomplicated for where you should start, probably way overcomplicated for where you need to end up. But essentially each of these scores have, further properties underneath them, right? Which is calculating each of these. So the product usage score is a calculated property. Same with all these things. But just to give some sort of examples here, I think the categories are sort of interesting to help folks, think about maybe what data they have, what might be interesting for them. But the types of things in here, so product usage score, generally, like I think we have, we're split down into two things. One is like product utilization, or essentially a measure of how much of the product that the customer bought are they actually using, right? So that could be, if a customer is paying for 10 seats and they're only using 8, maybe you just divide one by the other and you get 80%. If a customer, that is clearly much better than a customer who's paid for 10 seats and is only using 1.
Sure.
Right.
Yeah.
And then the other, I guess there's 2 other pieces there are sort of activity, like it could be how many people are active, if you are paying for seats and using them, are you using them a lot or just a little? And then are there specific features that indicate, or specific feature usage that indicates, better product usage than others, right? Maybe it's, you have a reporting feature that only really gets used if a customer is bringing in data, and that's sort of people using the reporting feature are more healthy than those who are not, that kind of thing.
Yeah, and like, again, if you're some type of SaaS company, right, you probably have the ability to look at the instance of your customer using your product and seeing metrics inside of there that would indicate that they're being successful, right? Like, you can send that data into HubSpot so long as like you're allowed to. It depends on the nature of the data, but you could at least send a signal to HubSpot and change a property that would then indicate, based on what we know about the results they're achieving in our tool, we can then change a property into HubSpot that says like successful, unsuccessful, mildly successful, total failure, or something along those lines, right? There's a lot of stuff that you can bring in. The other thing you can think about using too is custom behavioral events, right? Are they doing certain things like in your tool that you then kind of say and write that back to the contact record and say, yes, they did it or they didn't. And then that can power other properties via workflows that will like change depending on if people are doing these things in your tool you want them to do, right? But I think the other really cool thing that you were doing with those workflows is you're taking the amount of all that data in its total and you're simplifying it into like these easier scores that are easier to understand so people can actually do stuff with that data, right? So this is a really good example of this, where you're setting health to easy to understand, green, yellow, red. You know what I mean? And like, okay, that's digestible, and I don't have to go look at every single freaking metric to understand like how this customer is doing, right?
For sure. And the nice thing about it is you can then go create another workflow. I mean, you could do it in the same workflow, but I would probably split it, honestly, which just takes that health. Let's see, I think it's called health. So you can now say, if it's, I would probably do it this way. I don't know how you would do this, Max, but this is how I would do. Whoops.
Well, it depends on what you want to do with the workflow. I mean, for the enrollment, you could do is known, and then you could break it off and do different stuff with a branch or something like that.
Yeah, that's a good point.
What you were doing would ultimately do the same exact thing because it's only 3 options, so it's all the same. It's just less clicks. Yeah.
Right. Forgetting how to use workflows. Yeah. So now you can do if it's green. Well, that is not. Property is health, and if it's green, we'll just do one of these just so it's quick. But now you can say this branch is healthy, but right then now you can go and define, okay, well, we do this when we have a green health score, right? Or a better example is probably actually if this is red, right?
Yeah. Because if it's green, maybe we do absolutely nothing and let them ride. You know what I mean?
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
So this now is going to say, whenever we have a customer who is at risk, we want to, escalate this, right? We want to create a task. And of course, as we talked about before, you can now pull in all the context, all the contacts. Have they been active? Have they not been? All that good stuff. Have they been contacted? How would you parody this, Max?
Well, I mean, I think I could probably think of a bunch of parodies, but I think like the other big thing you're showing here too is when we talked about getting all those different metrics that are taking all these complicated things that you're using to calculate a health score. There's that element of like, one, we get it down to like a very simple property or a couple properties that people can look at to easily translate all that info. But then also it makes things more efficient for you as an admin when you're setting up things like workflows or even reporting, right?
Yeah.
That are based off of that. Because now, instead of you having to build a criteria that has 27 different things it's looking at that would indicate that it's a bad, like a code red customer, if you will, you're literally just pulling in that one single property that you built that's like giving you the summation of the situation, the vibe, if you will, of what's going on with that customer, right? So from there, the question is like, okay, if we make that determination, one, is there any like if then branches that we use to check for any other nuances, right?
Yeah.
And then how do we take action off it, right? So if it's an angry customer, right, maybe we are, if they're not like performing that well, right, maybe check to see if they've like submitted any support tickets, right? If they had, looks like it could be that they're handling it. If they haven't, maybe something's going wrong and they don't know it, right? So maybe you should like assign something to whoever their like long-term success or service person is, right? To get them to connect. Perhaps even you could create tasks for the original salesperson and the success person to connect and say, hey, like what were their original goals? Like why aren't they performing, or why aren't they doing this, doing that, right? So there's a lot of different things you could do to even just like trigger conversations of folks who have touched that customer in some way to kind of get ahead of like, they might not renew if this is how things are going, right? So maybe we need to go back to the drawing board and figure out a good way to kind of right the ship here, right? Versus just sending them an email to remind them to log into your product and use it, a lot of cool stuff you can do for sure.
Yeah, totally. I think that's how do you give those prompts that they're going to really drive the specific action for this customer, right? If you can get to if you can take away we have to figure out which customer to go work on, you can just focus on we're going to go help this customer. And the system can deal with the specific prioritization. And the more context you can provide there, the better. I feel like that's been a theme here. How do you define the criteria, define the thresholds in the data, and then give as much context to run the actual process that you're suggesting?
Again, is getting out of the cookie cutter mentality of just send the email, just assign the task, right? It's like, no, that task should change depending on the situation, right? Even if it's just in a nuanced way, because that could be the difference between you approaching the customer and having a great conversation versus you approaching it with not all the information and them getting frustrated because they got to re-explain stuff to you, or you didn't know they were heated in the first place, or what their demeanor was, right? Like this is all stuff that you can kind of figure out and kind of build into the way that you're enabling your folks to reach out in the right way or to get the right information in front of them.
Totally.
Stuart, a question I had, if you don't mind like pivoting real quick, is you had a workflow that was like building these arrows plans, right? And I know that you can either attach like an arrows plan to either a deal or a ticket. For the folks watching that maybe haven't like used arrows, do you what's your sort of insight on why you would want to use one object or the other in terms of the one that you use the arrows plan on. Is there like a calculus you use, or like a, I don't know, maybe your own internal if then sort of branch that you run in your head to kind of say, hey, you should have an onboarding thing on a ticket or an onboarding plan like on a deal?
Yeah, so there's a LinkedIn post I wrote that sort of does have that sort of matrix, but the first question I would always ask is, what do you currently have access to in your HubSpot account?
Yeah.
Because and if you only have deals or only have tickets, are you interested in adding the other? Because if not, then you may as well just stop, right?
Gotcha.
Add it to whichever one you already have.
Yeah.
The big differences between there's no difference from a arrows attachment perspective, but from a HubSpot perspective, the big differences are you'll get revenue tracked out of the box with deals. You can certainly set it up with tickets if you are willing to go do the work to configure it, but it'll be out of the box. You'll have revenue tracking on deals. So if you care about that during onboarding, or if you're in a model where a customer isn't technically, you're not like counting that customer is until they're actually through onboarding and that sort of act. Anyway, however you're accounting for that, deals will give you that out of the box. Often the thing that we hear is, well, sales runs out of deals and they don't want us to touch how things run in deals, even if it's in a different pipeline. Don't want us to touch deals. So tickets create sort of team separation there. So that can be helpful.
Gotcha.
The big sort of technical difference between deals and tickets, of course, though, is that you can associate a ticket with a deal. You cannot associate a deal with a deal.
Yeah.
So that sort of nuance, if you want to have that tracked back, like typically the way that we work around that with folks is, well, you associate everything with the company record and use that as your sort of highest level, view. But that's sort of technically the biggest difference.
Well, Daniel wrote spicy topic in the in the chat, so it sounds like this is a point of contention. I mean, so like it's almost as if like, all right, if you're already using ticket objects for onboarding, so like a lot of the time, like if you think of the default way tickets are kind of like set up for, it's more for like the support use case, right? Oh, you got a problem, let's solve it, right? We'll use a ticket to do it. You know what I mean?
Let's just while you're talking, I'm going to go show like how arrows actually fits, so that just people have some
so people got the visual on it. But then like if you were going to use a ticket for onboarding or delivering some other kind of service, chances are the stages or they call them statuses, I think, on the service hubs on a ticket object, that's going to have like way more complicated and like longer sets of like statuses, right? So you would separate that into a separate pipeline, right? And then from there, essentially,
that is one thing that I would always say, regardless of whatever objects you're using, use a separate pipeline for onboarding. Use a separate pipeline for each stage in the life cycle, because it's just going to be so much easier to manage the process, manage reporting, split it all out. You can always associate it back.
But the benefit is you can associate that ticket to the deal. Whereas if you were doing if you were doing just deals, like if you had, let's say you had Sales Pro, but not Service Hub Pro, so you couldn't do the extra pipelines on tickets, right? But you could do extra pipelines on deals. You could have a separate deal pipeline that's just onboarding. But the thing that stinks there is that you're not getting the association, but you can associate the onboarding plan though to that original deal, right? Okay, so you still get a little bit of connection there, right? So you're not like totally losing out on it. But like if you want to see like the onboarding ticket associated to it, then
so I just created this one really quick. Of course, I stupidly didn't add any context to the ticket before I created it, so we don't have any people on it. We'd have to go.
Do you want to share? I don't think you're not sharing the
that is screen. Perfect. I will just start over and not do it wrong. That works great. Okay, we are out of time here. Like, we can keep going for a minute or two here. So let's create a new check. I'm definitely sharing this. I'm just going to create a new ticket. I'm going to make up a company. Max is Awesome Co. We're just going to create this. This is a ticket in the same way that any you would create any other. I don't think Max is going to be in here. Let's see. Some test emails in here. Let's add some people to this ticket who are going to be involved in our onboarding if we wanted to. We could go add association labels for Who's the primary point of contact, who you get out onboarding contact, for all these things. You can do all this in a workflow, of course, but manually I would just go create plan, pick the template that I want to use to create this onboarding plan, associate those contacts, create the plan, and then inside of HubSpot, I'll now have a customer-facing onboarding plan that I send. As an internal person, I can go access this from HubSpot, but otherwise I would send the link to it to the customer. And now they can go ahead and, if I switch this to view, we can go ahead and make progress through the tasks sort of collaboratively that we're going to work on in onboarding. And then we're going to get all this data back.
Let's go.
There's not many things in here, but there's like 40 properties that we can sync back to that ticket. And the advantage there is that, of course, inside of HubSpot, you're going to start seeing like what's happening in our onboarding, and you can use that in workflows reporting.
And then just to address a little thing in the chat here. So Nick said, on the flip side of revenue out of the box and deals, service level agreements on tickets. Yes, with one caveat, service level agreements only exist in the conversations inbox. If you're using another app by Happily called Timerman, however, you can bring SLAs down to the ticket record. So imagine a world where you're looking at your onboarding ticket. At the top, you've got your direct line of communication with your customer using your Arrows onboarding plan. And then below that, you've got your SLA, information. So if you're within or, outside of your SLA, right underneath that, man, you got everything you need, baby, when you just put it all together. So go check out Timerman, Nick, if you haven't seen it yet. Cool. I had to get the plug in there, man. I'm the chief evangelist. I'm out here evangelizing.
Certainly doing that. This is no, you can plug the stuff that fits. It's all good stuff.
Yeah, I mean, our stuff works together really well. You know what I mean? It's kind of like a match made in heaven. So
it's kind of nice when things are built for HubSpot if you're trying to use HubSpot to do awesome stuff.
Exactly. Very cool.
Yeah.
All right.
Is that it? Yeah. Thank you so much for doing this. This was
it's super fun. Thanks for everyone for showing up and hanging out with us. And I got a couple more goofy Steely's workflows in the bank that I'll drip out. Maybe I'll do one today as just a celebration for the webinar. But yeah, awesome. Thank you, everybody, and thank you, Stuart. This was super cool.
Yeah, thanks so much, everybody, for joining. Head over to arrows.to/vault. That's where all the this workflows, all the templates, all the good stuff there is in one place to steal. Don't need your email address. Just head over to arrows.to/vault. Go check out Happily for all the apps that Max mentioned that sit nicely on top of HubSpot. Or of course, if you want an onboarding plan, arrows.to. More than happy to chat. But thanks, everybody.